My name is Demetrius Kane. I am 37 years old, and I work as a financial analyst for Meridian Capital Management, a mid-sized investment firm located in downtown Seattle, Washington. I live in a two-bedroom condominium in the Belltown neighborhood, in a glass tower that was built during the tech boom of the early 2000s and that offers spectacular views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains from my living room windows. My condominium is on the 18th floor, furnished with the kind of modern, minimalist pieces that you see in design magazines. A leather sectional sofa in charcoal gray, a glass dining table with chrome legs, and a collection of abstract artwork that I purchased from local galleries during weekend art walks in Pioneer Square. The space reflects my personality and lifestyle. Organized, sophisticated, and focused on quality rather than quantity. I drive a 5-year-old BMW 5 Series that I bought certified pre-owned from a dealership in Bellevue, and I maintain the kind of controlled, methodical lifestyle that most people associate with professionals who work in finance and investment management. My wardrobe consists of 8 nearly identical navy blue suits from Brooks Brothers, white dress shirts that I have dry cleaned every week, and a collection of silk ties in conservative patterns that project competence and reliability without drawing unnecessary attention. Every morning, I wake up at 5:45 to the sound of my phone alarm, which is set to a gentle chime rather than the harsh buzzing that most people use. I spend 30 minutes on my exercise bike while reading financial news on my tablet, checking overnight market activity in Asian and European exchanges, and reviewing research reports from investment banks and economic analysts who track the sectors and companies that are most relevant to my clients' portfolios. After exercising, I shower and dress in one of my identical suits, eat breakfast while watching CNBC's morning market coverage, and arrive at my office by 7:15 to prepare for the trading day ahead. My office is located on the 23rd floor of the Columbia Center, Seattle's tallest building, and my desk faces east toward the airport and the distant Cascade Mountains that form the backdrop for the city's sprawling metropolitan area. My work involves analyzing investment opportunities, managing client portfolios, and developing financial strategies for high-net-worth individuals who trust our firm to grow and protect their wealth over decades of market volatility and economic uncertainty. I specialize in estate planning and inheritance management, helping wealthy families structure their assets in ways that minimize tax liability while ensuring that their children and grandchildren receive appropriate financial support and education about responsible money management. Most of my clients are successful entrepreneurs, corporate executives, and professional investors who have accumulated significant wealth through decades of hard work, smart decision-making, and careful risk management. They depend on me to understand complex tax laws, investment regulations, and estate planning strategies that can help preserve their assets and transfer them efficiently to the next generation. From the outside, my life probably looks exactly like what a successful millennial finance professional is supposed to achieve. Steady income in the low 6 figures, comprehensive benefits including health insurance and a generous 401k matching program, a downtown condominium with panoramic water views, and enough disposable income to afford weekend trips to Vancouver, occasional dinners at restaurants that require reservations, and a small collection of luxury watches that I have accumulated over the years as rewards for meeting professional goals and client acquisition targets. I have colleagues who respect my analytical skills and attention to detail, supervisors who appreciate my ability to manage complex client relationships and navigate regulatory requirements that govern the investment industry, and a small group of friends who know me as the reliable guy who always picks up the check at group dinners, never cancels plans at the last minute, and can be counted on to provide sound financial advice during major life decisions like home purchases, career changes, and retirement planning. What none of them know is that my carefully constructed professional life exists alongside a family situation that has been complicated by death, remarriage, money, and secrets that I have been keeping for the past 18 months. What none of them understand is that beneath my financial expertise and professional success lies a personal story about inheritance, family loyalty, and moral decisions that has forced me to question everything I thought I knew about trust, obligation, and the true nature of the people closest to me. My father, Harrison Kane, died of pancreatic cancer in March of 2022, at the age of 68, after a 6-month illness that progressed much more rapidly than any of us had anticipated. Dad had been a successful commercial real estate developer who had built a regional company that specialized in office complexes, retail centers, and mixed-use developments throughout the Pacific Northwest. Kane Development had been his life's work, a business he had started in his 30s with a small loan from his father-in-law and a single property renovation project in Georgetown, and that he had grown over 3 decades into a company that employed over 200 people and managed millions of square feet of commercial real estate. Dad was the kind of man who commanded respect through competence and integrity rather than intimidation or manipulation. He treated his employees fairly, honored his commitments to clients and business partners even when market conditions made those commitments financially costly, and built his company's reputation on the principle that successful real estate development required long-term thinking, careful planning, and genuine concern for the communities where his projects were located. Real estate development is not just about making money. Dad would tell me during the conversations we had about business and career planning throughout my 20s and early 30s. It is about creating spaces where people can work and live and build their lives. Every office building we develop provides jobs for hundreds of people. Every retail center we build serves families in the surrounding neighborhoods. Every mixed-use project we complete contributes to the economic vitality of the entire region. Dad had always hoped that I would join Kane Development after college and eventually take over the business as his successor and heir. He had offered me positions within the company multiple times throughout my 20s, with starting salaries and advancement opportunities that would have been difficult to match in other industries. The entry-level position he offered me in 2010 included a base salary of $75,000, health benefits, and a clear path to senior management that could have led to executive-level responsibilities within 5 years. But I had chosen to pursue a career in finance instead, partly because I was genuinely interested in investment management and financial analysis, but mostly because I wanted to establish my own professional identity rather than being known as Harrison Kane's son who had inherited his position through family connections rather than earning it through competence and hard work. I understand why you want to build your own career, Dad had told me when I explained my decision to work for Meridian Capital Management instead of joining Kane Development after graduating from the University of Washington with a degree in business and finance. I respect your desire to prove yourself independently, to know that your success comes from your own abilities rather than from family favoritism. But I want you to know that there will always be a place for you in this company if you change your mind, and that eventually, this business will be yours whether you work here or not. Dad had married my mother, Catherine Kane, when they were both in their mid-20s, shortly after he had started Kane Development and she had finished her degree in accounting at Seattle University. They had built Kane Development together as full partners in both business and personal life, with Mom handling the administrative and financial aspects of the company while Dad focused on project development, client relationships, and the construction management side of the business. Mom was brilliant with numbers and had an intuitive understanding of real estate financing, tax implications, and investment strategies that complemented Dad's expertise in construction and project management. Together, they had created a business model that was both profitable and sustainable, growing the company steadily over 3 decades without taking on excessive debt or pursuing risky development projects that could have jeopardized their employees' job security or their clients' investments. They had been married for 38 years when Mom died of breast cancer in 2018, a loss that devastated Dad emotionally and that marked the beginning of his gradual withdrawal from the day-to-day operations of Kane Development. Mom's death left a void in both the personal and professional aspects of Dad's life that he struggled to fill during the 2 years between her death and his remarriage to Vivian. "Your mother was the heart of this company," Dad told me during one of our conversations about his plans for retirement and succession following Mom's death. She understood the financial side of the business better than I ever did, and she kept me grounded when I wanted to take on projects that were too ambitious or risky. I do not know how to run this company without her input and guidance. During the 2 years after Mom's death, Dad became increasingly depressed and isolated. He would come to the office every day and handle routine business decisions, but he stopped pursuing new development opportunities and seemed to lose interest in the strategic planning and relationship building that had been central to Kane Development's success. He also stopped socializing with friends and business associates, declined invitations to industry events and charity fundraisers, and spent most of his free time alone in the house that he and Mom had shared for over 20 years. I was worried about Dad's mental health and his ability to manage Kane Development effectively during this period of grief and depression. I would call him several times a week to check on his well-being, visit him regularly for dinner and conversation, and encourage him to seek professional counseling or medical treatment for his depression. But Dad was stubborn about accepting help and insisted that he just needed time to process his grief and figure out how to move forward without Mom. "I know you are concerned about me," Dad would say when I suggested that he consider therapy or antidepressant medication to help him cope with his grief. "But I have to work through this my own way at my own pace. Your mother and I were together for almost 40 years. I cannot expect to get over losing her in a few months." 2 years after Mom's death, Dad met Vivian Carlisle at a charity fundraiser for the Seattle Symphony, an event that he had attended reluctantly at the insistence of his business partner, who thought he needed to start participating in social activities again. Vivian was working as an interior decorator for high-end residential and commercial clients throughout the Seattle area, and she had been hired to help design the decorations and table settings for the fundraising gala. Vivian was 45 years old when she met Dad, an attractive woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, and the kind of sophisticated style and social confidence that made her popular at networking events and charity functions. She was divorced from her previous husband, had no children, and seemed to understand the social and professional obligations that came with being involved with a successful businessman who was active in Seattle's civic and charitable communities. "Vivian brings energy and excitement to my life that I thought I had lost forever when your mother died," Dad told me when he announced their engagement after they had been dating for only 8 months. "She makes me want to travel again, to attend social events, to think about the future rather than dwelling on the past. I know this might seem sudden, but at my age, I do not see the point in waiting years to make decisions about how I want to spend the rest of my life." I had mixed feelings about Dad's decision to remarry so soon after Mom's death. On one hand, I was glad that he had found companionship and emotional support during what had been a very difficult period of grief and adjustment. Dad had been deeply depressed after Mom's death, and his new relationship with Vivian had clearly improved his mood and given him renewed interest in business planning, social activities, and long-term goals. On the other hand, I was concerned about Vivian's motivations for marrying a wealthy widower who was 20 years older than her, and who was obviously still emotionally vulnerable from the loss of his first wife. I worried that Vivian might be more interested in Dad's money and social status than in building a genuine partnership based on love, shared values, and mutual respect. "I know what you are thinking," Dad told me when I expressed some of my concerns about the speed of their relationship and the significant age difference between them. "You are wondering whether she loves me for who I am or for what I can provide for her. I had the same concerns when I first started having serious feelings for her." "And what conclusion did you reach?" I asked, trying to be supportive while also expressing my legitimate concerns about his well-being and financial security. "I decided that at my age, with my health problems and my emotional baggage from losing your mother, I am fortunate that any woman would want to build a life with me," Dad said. "Vivian makes me happy in ways that I had not expected to experience again. She brings energy and excitement to my life that I thought I had lost forever when your mother died." Dad and Vivian were married in a small ceremony at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle in September of 2020, with only immediate family members and a few close friends in attendance. The ceremony was elegant but intimate, reflecting Dad's preference for privacy and Vivian's sophisticated taste in event planning and decoration. I served as Dad's best man, and I tried to be gracious and welcoming to Vivian despite my ongoing concerns about her intentions and her compatibility with Dad's personality and values. The wedding reception was held in the hotel's Georgian room, with dinner and dancing for about 40 guests who represented the most important relationships in Dad's personal and professional life. Vivian wore an elegant ivory dress that had been custom-made by a designer in Los Angeles, and Dad wore a classic black tuxedo that made him look more handsome and confident than he had appeared in the 2 years since Mom's death. During the reception, I had opportunities to observe the dynamic between Dad and Vivian and to talk with her about her background, her career, and her goals for their marriage. She seemed genuinely affectionate toward Dad and appeared to be making an effort to connect with his friends and business associates in ways that suggested she understood the importance of his professional relationships and community involvement. But I also noticed that Vivian seemed very interested in the details of Dad's business and financial situation. She would ask sophisticated questions about Kane Development's operations, about Dad's investment portfolio, and about his estate planning strategies that seemed unusually knowledgeable for someone whose background was in interior decorating rather than business or finance. I want to understand Harrison's work and his financial situation so I can be a supportive partner, Vivian explained when I asked about her interest in these business topics. I know that Kane Development is very important to him, and I want to learn enough about the company to be helpful rather than just being a wife who does not understand her husband's professional life. Vivian seemed to make Dad happy during the first year of their marriage. She encouraged him to travel more, to attend cultural events like theater performances and art exhibitions that he had neglected during his period of grief, and to host dinner parties and social gatherings that reconnected him with friends and business associates he had avoided since Mom's death. She also took an active interest in redecorating Dad's house, updating furniture and artwork and landscaping in ways that reflected her professional expertise and personal taste. The house renovations were extensive and expensive, involving custom furniture, original artwork, and landscape design that transformed Dad's property into something that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. Vivian hired contractors and designers who specialized in luxury home improvements, and the total cost of the renovations exceeded $200,000 over the course of their first year of marriage. But I noticed that Vivian also seemed to be encouraging Dad to spend money in ways that were inconsistent with his typically conservative approach to personal finance. She convinced him to buy a vacation home in Maui, a beachfront property that cost over $3 million and that required ongoing maintenance expenses and property management fees. She also persuaded him to purchase expensive jewelry and artwork, to take luxury trips to Europe and Asia that cost tens of thousands of dollars, and to upgrade his cars, watches, and other personal possessions in ways that seemed motivated more by Vivian's desire for status symbols than by Dad's genuine interests or needs. "Your father works very hard and he has been very successful," Vivian told me when I expressed concerns about their spending during a family dinner in the fall of 2021. "He deserves to enjoy the fruits of his labor while he is still healthy enough to travel and experience new things. Money that sits in bank accounts and investment portfolios does not provide any enjoyment or life satisfaction. But Dad has always been careful about managing his money responsibly," I replied. "He has always believed in living below his means and saving for the future rather than spending everything he earns on immediate gratification. Your father's approach to money was appropriate when he was building his business and raising a family," Vivian said. "But now he is in his 60s, his company is successful and stable, and he has already provided for your future through his estate planning. This is the time in his life when he should be focusing on experiences and enjoyment rather than accumulating more wealth that he will never have time to spend. I understood Vivian's point about Dad deserving to enjoy his success, but I was still concerned about the rapid increase in their spending and the pressure she seemed to be putting on him to adopt a more extravagant lifestyle than he had ever expressed interest in before their marriage. I was also troubled by her assumption that Dad had already provided for my future through estate planning, a comment that suggested she had detailed knowledge about Dad's financial assets and inheritance plans. In December of 2021, Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer during a routine physical examination that revealed elevated levels of certain proteins that can indicate the presence of tumors. The diagnosis was devastating because pancreatic cancer is one of the most aggressive and difficult-to-treat forms of cancer, with survival rates that are much lower than other types of cancer that are detected early and treated aggressively. Dad's oncologist, Dr. Robert Chun at Swedish Medical Center, explained that pancreatic cancer is often called a silent killer because it rarely produces obvious symptoms until it has progressed to advanced stages where treatment options are limited and prognosis is poor. By the time Dad's cancer was detected, it had already begun spreading to nearby organs and lymph nodes, which meant that surgical removal was not possible and that treatment would focus on slowing the progression of the disease rather than curing it. We are going to pursue aggressive treatment including chemotherapy and radiation, Dr. Chun told Dad and our family during the first consultation about treatment options and expectations. But I want you to understand that pancreatic cancer is a very serious disease, and you should use this time to make sure your personal and business affairs are in order. Dad approached his cancer diagnosis with the same methodical, practical mindset that he had applied to business challenges throughout his career. He immediately began working with his attorney, Margaret Williamson, his accountant, Patricia Rodriguez, and his financial advisor, James Morrison, to update his will, review his insurance policies, and organize his business and personal assets in ways that would minimize complications for his family and business partners after his death. I want to make sure that everything is clearly documented and legally protected, Dad told me during one of our conversations about his estate planning process. I do not want my death to create financial or legal problems for you or for the employees and clients who depend on Kane Development for their livelihoods. Dad also began spending more time with me, sharing information about Kane Development's operations, client relationships, and strategic planning that he thought would be important for me to understand as his heir and eventual successor. These conversations were some of the most meaningful we had ever shared, because they represented Dad's effort to pass down not just his business assets, but also his knowledge, experience, and values about leadership, responsibility, and ethical business practices. Kane Development represents more than just my personal wealth, Dad explained during one of our discussions about the company's future and my potential role in its operations. This company provides jobs for over 200 families, manages properties that house thousands of businesses, and contributes millions of dollars in taxes and economic activity to communities throughout the region. When you inherit this company, you will be inheriting responsibility for all of those people and communities. I told Dad that I appreciated his confidence in my ability to handle such significant responsibilities, but that I was not sure whether I wanted to leave my career in finance to take over Kane Development. I explained that I enjoyed my work at Meridian Capital Management, that I had spent years building expertise and professional relationships in the investment industry, and that I was not certain I had the right skills and temperament to manage a real estate development company. You do not have to decide immediately, Dad said. You can hire experienced managers to handle the day-to-day operations while you learn the business gradually. Or you can choose to sell the company and use the proceeds to pursue whatever career and lifestyle goals are most important to you. The most important thing is that you have choices and financial security. During the 6 months of Dad's illness, Vivian was generally supportive and attentive, accompanying him to medical appointments, helping to organize his medications and treatment schedule, and making sure he was comfortable during the periods when chemotherapy and radiation made him feel weak and nauseated. She seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being and genuinely sad about the prospect of losing him. But I also noticed that Vivian seemed very interested in the estate planning conversations that Dad was having with his attorney and financial advisor. She would ask detailed questions about inheritance taxes, trust structures, and asset protection strategies that seemed unusually sophisticated for someone whose background was in interior decorating rather than finance or law. I want to make sure I understand how Harrison's estate planning will affect my financial security after he is gone, Vivian explained when I asked about her involvement in these legal and financial discussions. As his wife, I have certain rights and expectations, and I want to make sure those rights are properly protected. I understood that Vivian had legitimate concerns about her financial security as Dad's widow, but I was troubled by how much attention she seemed to be paying to the technical details of estate planning rather than focusing on Dad's medical treatment and emotional support during his final months. Dad died at home in March of 2022, surrounded by family and with hospice care that helped manage his pain and ensured that his final weeks were as comfortable as possible. His death was not unexpected given the aggressiveness of his cancer, but it was still emotionally devastating for everyone who had loved him and depended on his leadership and guidance. The funeral was held at St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle, with over 300 people in attendance including family members, business associates, employees of Kane Development, and community leaders who had worked with Dad on various civic and charitable projects throughout his career. The service was a fitting tribute to a man who had built a successful business while maintaining his integrity and his commitment to serving others. Father Michael O'Brien, who had known Dad for over 20 years and who had officiated at his wedding to Mom, delivered a eulogy that captured Dad's character and his contributions to his family and community. Harrison Kane was a man who understood that success is not measured only by wealth or professional achievements, but by the positive impact you have on other people's lives. He built a business that provided opportunities for hundreds of families, and he raised a son who carries forward his values of integrity, generosity, and service to others. After the funeral, Dad's attorney, Margaret Williamson, scheduled a meeting to read Dad's will and explain the distribution of his assets to his beneficiaries. The meeting was held at Margaret's law office downtown, with Vivian and me as the primary attendees, along with Margaret's associate who specialized in estate planning and tax law. I expected the will reading to be a straightforward process where Dad's assets would be divided between Vivian and me according to some reasonable formula that reflected both her status as his surviving spouse and my position as his only child and business heir. I assumed that Vivian would inherit the house, some financial assets, and possibly a stake in Kane Development, while I would inherit the majority of the business and the remainder of Dad's investment portfolio. What I discovered instead was that Dad had structured his estate in a much more complex and surprising way that reflected careful planning and perhaps some concerns about family dynamics and financial responsibility that he had never discussed with me directly. Your father's estate is valued at approximately $28 million, Margaret announced as she began reviewing the terms of Dad's will. This includes the house and personal property, his investment portfolio, his life insurance policies, and his ownership stake in Kane Development, which represents the majority of his net worth. Margaret explained that Dad had left the house and its contents to Vivian, along with a cash inheritance of $2 million and the right to continue living in the house for as long as she chose. He had also left her his collection of artwork and jewelry that they had purchased together during their marriage, and had made provisions for her to receive ongoing income from a trust fund that would provide approximately $10,000 per month for the rest of her life. Your father wanted to make sure that Vivian would be financially secure and comfortable after his death, Margaret told us. He believed that these provisions would allow her to maintain her current lifestyle without requiring her to work if she chose not to. The remainder of Dad's estate, including Kane Development and most of his investment portfolio, had been left to me. But rather than receiving these assets immediately, they had been placed in a complex trust structure that would give me access to the assets gradually over a period of several years. with full control transferred to me when I reached the age of 40. Your father was concerned that inheriting such a large amount of money and business responsibility at once might be overwhelming or might interfere with your own career development, Margaret explained. He wanted to make sure that you had time to mature and gain experience before taking full control of Kane development and the financial assets that come with it. The trust structure meant that I would receive income from Dad's investments and could draw on the trust principal for major expenses like home purchases or education costs, but that I would not have complete control over the assets until I turned 40 in 3 years. Until then, the trust would be managed by a committee that included Margaret, Dad's financial advisor James Morrison, and the current president of Kane Development, Patricia Chun. But there was one more element of Dad's estate planning that Margaret had not yet revealed, and that would change everything about my relationship with Vivian and my understanding of Dad's concerns about money and family loyalty. In addition to the assets I have already described, Margaret said, your father maintained a separate investment account that was not included in the primary estate. This account contains approximately $20 million in stocks, bonds, and other securities that he accumulated over the past 10 years through careful investment and business profits that he did not reinvest in Kane Development. Margaret explained that this separate account had been set up as a private inheritance specifically for me, with instructions that Vivian was not to be informed about its existence unless I chose to tell her myself. The account would be transferred to me immediately upon Dad's death, with no trust restrictions or waiting periods. Your father wanted you to have complete financial independence and flexibility, Margaret said, handing me a folder of documents related to the secret inheritance. He wanted you to be able to make decisions about your career and your life without having to worry about money or without feeling obligated to take over Kane Development if that was not what you really wanted to do. I sat in Margaret's office, holding documents that represented more money than I had ever imagined possessing, trying to process the implications of Dad's decision to hide this inheritance from Vivian. $20 million was enough money to retire immediately, to pursue any career or lifestyle I wanted, to travel the world, to start my own business, or to become a philanthropist who could make significant contributions to causes I cared about. But Dad's decision to keep this inheritance secret from Vivian also suggested that he had concerns about her motivations and her potential claims on his estate that he had never shared with me directly. If Dad had trusted Vivian completely, if he had believed that her love for him was genuine and unconditional, then there would have been no reason to hide such a significant portion of his wealth from her. The secret inheritance implied that Dad suspected Vivian might be more interested in his money than in his well-being, and that he wanted to make sure I would be financially protected regardless of any claims she might make on his estate or any legal challenges she might pursue after his death. Why did my father choose to structure his estate this way? I asked Margaret. Why did he want to keep this inheritance secret from Vivian? Your father never explained his reasoning to me directly, Margaret replied, but he did express concerns about making sure that his primary heir would be protected from potential complications or disputes that might arise after his death. He wanted to ensure that you would have resources that were completely independent of any other considerations. I left Margaret's office that day with mixed feelings about Dad's secret inheritance and the responsibilities that came with it. On one hand, I was grateful for Dad's generosity and his concern for my financial security. The inheritance would give me freedom and opportunities that few people my age could imagine, and it represented Dad's confidence in my judgment and his desire to provide for my future. On the other hand, I was troubled by the implications of Dad's decision to hide such a significant amount of money from his wife. If Vivian deserved to know about all of Dad's assets, then keeping the inheritance secret would be unfair and potentially dishonest. If she did not deserve to know, then Dad's concerns about her motivations had been more serious than he had ever indicated to me. I decided not to tell Vivian about the secret inheritance, at least not immediately. I wanted time to process Dad's death, to understand my own feelings about the money and the responsibilities it represented, and to observe Vivian's behavior during the months following Dad's funeral before making any decisions about disclosure or family dynamics. The secret inheritance was transferred to my personal investment accounts within 2 weeks of Dad's death, managed by the same financial advisory firm that had handled Dad's investments for over 20 years. I continued working at Meridian Capital Management and living in my downtown condominium, maintaining the same lifestyle and professional routine that I had established before Dad's death. The only significant change in my daily life was the knowledge that I now had enough money to retire immediately if I chose to, or to take career risks that would have been impossible without such financial security. I found myself paying closer attention to investment opportunities and business ideas that I might want to pursue, and I began thinking more seriously about philanthropic causes and community organizations that I might want to support. But I also found myself watching Vivian more carefully, looking for signs that might help me understand Dad's decision to hide the inheritance from her and determine whether his concerns about her motivations had been justified. During the first few months after Dad's death, Vivian seemed appropriately grieved and subdued. She attended memorial services and family gatherings, maintained contact with Dad's friends and business associates, and generally behaved like a widow who was struggling to adjust to life without her husband. She continued living in Dad's house, which was now her house according to the terms of his will, and she seemed to be managing her grief and the practical aspects of widowhood in reasonable and healthy ways. But I also noticed that Vivian seemed very interested in the financial aspects of Dad's estate and the timeline for distributing his assets to his beneficiaries. She would ask detailed questions about the trust structure that controlled my inheritance, about the valuation of Kane development, and about the tax implications of various estate planning strategies that seemed unusually sophisticated for someone who was supposed to be focused on grieving and emotional recovery. "I want to make sure that Harrison's estate is being managed properly," Vivian explained when I asked about her involvement in these financial discussions. "As his widow, I have a responsibility to protect his legacy and make sure that his wishes are being carried out correctly. If you are someone who has ever wondered whether the people in your life might have hidden motivations for their interest in your family's money and inheritance, you need to keep listening to understand the warning signs that I missed and the protection my father provided for me." 6 months after Dad's death, Vivian began making changes to her lifestyle and spending patterns that seemed inconsistent with the grief and adjustment period that most widows experience. She started traveling frequently, taking expensive trips to Europe and Asia that seemed motivated more by personal enjoyment than by the need to escape memories or process grief through new experiences and environments. She also began dating other men, which I understood was her right as a widow, but which seemed premature given that Dad had only been dead for 6 months and they had been married for less than 2 years. I learned about her dating through mutual acquaintances who had seen her at restaurants and social events with different men, and who mentioned these sightings during casual conversations about family and social activities. People grieve differently, I told myself when I felt disturbed by reports of Vivian's social activities. She has a right to seek companionship and support wherever she can find it. Dad would want her to be happy rather than spending years mourning his death. But I was still troubled by how quickly Vivian seemed to be moving on from Dad's death, and by her continued interest in the financial aspects of his estate rather than the personal and emotional aspects of his legacy. She seemed more concerned about maximizing her inheritance than about preserving Dad's memory or maintaining relationships with the people who had been important to him. 9 months after Dad's death, I received a phone call from Margaret Williamson asking me to come to her office for an urgent meeting about Dad's estate and some information that had recently come to light about Vivian's background and legal history. "We have discovered some information about Vivian that your father may not have known when he married her," Margaret told me when I arrived at her office the next morning. "Information that might help explain why he chose to structure his estate the way he did." Margaret handed me a thick folder of documents that her law firm had compiled through private investigation and public records research. The folder contained court records, police reports, newspaper articles, and financial documents that painted a picture of Vivian's life before she met Dad that was very different from the story she had told our family. Vivian Carlisle is not her real name, Margaret explained as I began reviewing the documents with growing disbelief and horror. Her legal name is Vivian Carlisle Patterson, but she has also used the names Vivian Patterson, Vivian Carlisle Patterson, and Victoria Carlisle during different periods of her life and in different states where she has lived. The documents revealed that Vivian had been married 3 times before she married Dad, and that all 3 of her previous marriages had been to wealthy men who were significantly older than her and who had died within a few years of their weddings. Her first husband, Robert Patterson, had been a successful surgeon in California who had died of a heart attack 2 years after their marriage, leaving Vivian a substantial inheritance that included life insurance policies and investment accounts worth over $2 million. Her second husband, William Carlisle, had been a real estate investor in Arizona who had died in a car accident 3 years after their marriage. Vivian had inherited his house, his investment portfolio, and his life insurance policies, receiving approximately $3 million from his estate after taxes and legal fees. Her third husband, Thomas Morrison, had been a retired executive from Microsoft who had died of cancer 4 years after their marriage. Vivian had inherited his house in Bellevue, his stock options and retirement accounts, and his life insurance policies, receiving approximately $4 million from his estate. The pattern is consistent across all 3 marriages, Margaret explained as I studied the documents with growing disbelief and disgust. Vivian meets wealthy older men who are recently divorced or widowed, marries them after relatively brief courtships, and becomes their primary beneficiary. All 3 men died of natural causes or accidents, and there is no evidence of any criminal behavior. But the pattern suggests that Vivian deliberately targets wealthy men who are emotionally vulnerable and likely to die within a few years of marriage. The documents also revealed that Vivian had been investigated by police in Arizona following Thomas Morrison's death, after his adult children had raised questions about the circumstances of his death and the changes he had made to his will shortly before he died. The investigation had found no evidence of criminal activity, but it had uncovered information about Vivian's previous marriages and inheritance patterns that had raised concerns among law enforcement and estate planning attorneys. Vivian appears to be what criminal psychologists call a black widow, someone who systematically marries wealthy partners with the intention of inheriting their assets after they die, Margaret continued. She is not technically a criminal because she does not murder her husbands or forge legal documents. But she is a predator who exploits grieving and vulnerable people for financial gain. I sat in Margaret's office, staring at documents that revealed the true nature of the woman Dad had married and the danger he had unknowingly exposed himself and his estate to during the last 2 years of his life. I felt sick thinking about how Vivian had manipulated Dad's emotions and his desire for companionship in order to position herself as his heir and beneficiary. But I also felt profound gratitude for Dad's wisdom and foresight in structuring his estate to protect me from Vivian's predatory behavior. The secret inheritance that I had received meant that Vivian could not claim the majority of Dad's wealth, and that I would be financially secure regardless of any legal challenges she might pursue against his estate. What should I do with this information? I asked Margaret. Should I confront Vivian about her past? Should I report her to law enforcement? Should I try to challenge her inheritance from Dad's estate? Your father's will is legally valid and clearly written, Margaret replied. Vivian is entitled to the inheritance he left her, regardless of her motivations for marrying him. But this information might be useful if Vivian attempts to challenge the estate or make additional claims against your inheritance. Margaret advised me to keep the information confidential for the time being, but to be prepared to use it if Vivian created legal or financial problems that threatened Dad's estate or my inheritance. She also suggested that I limit my contact with Vivian and avoid sharing information about my financial situation or my plans for Kane development. I left Margaret's office that day with a completely different understanding of my family situation and the threats that Dad had been protecting me from through his careful estate planning. The secret inheritance was not just a generous gift or a sign of Dad's confidence in my judgment. It was a protective measure designed to ensure that Vivian could not manipulate or exploit me the way she had manipulated and exploited him and her previous husbands. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about all the conversations I had had with Dad about Vivian during their marriage, and all the signs I had missed or misinterpreted about her true motivations and intentions. Her interest in his money, her encouragement of extravagant spending, her detailed knowledge of estate planning, her sophisticated questions about inheritance taxes and trust structures. All of these behaviors made sense when viewed through the lens of someone who was systematically positioning herself to inherit as much wealth as possible. I also found myself feeling grateful that Dad had been wise enough to see through Vivian's deception, even if he had chosen not to confront her directly or end their marriage. By keeping the majority of his wealth secret and ensuring that I would inherit it regardless of Vivian's claims, Dad had protected both his legacy and my future from a predator who had viewed our family as nothing more than a source of financial gain. 3 weeks after my meeting with Margaret, Vivian called me to suggest that we have dinner together to discuss family matters and our ongoing relationship as Dad's surviving relatives. I agreed to meet her partly because I was curious about what she wanted to discuss, but mostly because I wanted to observe her behavior now that I understood her true nature and motivations. We met at Canlis, one of Seattle's most expensive and prestigious restaurants, the kind of place that Vivian had always enjoyed because of its elegant atmosphere and its reputation as a destination for wealthy and influential people. She arrived wearing a new designer dress and expensive jewelry that I suspected she had purchased with money from Dad's inheritance, looking like someone who was already spending her inheritance on luxury items and lifestyle upgrades. "I have been thinking about your father's legacy and how we can work together to honor his memory," Vivian said after we had ordered our meals and settled into what appeared to be a serious conversation about family and financial matters. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, trying to sound interested while watching for signs of the manipulative behavior that Margaret's investigation had revealed. "I think we should consider making some changes to the trust structure that controls your inheritance from Kane Development," Vivian said. "Your father set up those trusts when he was sick and not thinking clearly about the tax implications and the administrative complications they create." Vivian explained that she had been consulting with financial advisors and estate planning attorneys who had suggested that the trust structure was unnecessarily complex and potentially costly in terms of taxes and management fees. She proposed that we work together to simplify the estate and accelerate the timeline for transferring Dad's assets to their ultimate beneficiaries. "If we restructure the trusts, you could take control of Kane Development immediately rather than waiting until you turn 40. Vivian said. "And I could receive a lump sum payment from the estate rather than monthly distributions that are subject to fluctuation based on investment performance." I realized that Vivian was proposing changes that would give her immediate access to more of Dad's money, while potentially exposing me to tax liabilities and legal complications that the current trust structure was designed to avoid. Her proposal was presented as being beneficial for both of us, but it was actually a scheme to maximize her inheritance at my expense. "I appreciate your concern about the trust structure," I replied, "but I think Dad put a lot of thought into his estate planning. I would prefer to follow his instructions rather than making changes based on advice from people who did not know him or understand his goals." Vivian's expression changed slightly when I declined her proposal, and I could see frustration and calculation behind her friendly demeanor. "Your father was a wonderful man, but he was not a financial expert," she said. "The people I have been consulting with have decades of experience in estate planning and tax optimization. They understand strategies that could save us both significant amounts of money. If these strategies are so beneficial, why did not Dad's own financial advisors recommend them?" I asked. "Dad worked with some of the most respected estate planning attorneys and tax experts in Seattle. If there were better ways to structure his estate, they would have suggested them. Sometimes it takes fresh perspectives to identify opportunities that long-term advisors might miss, Vivian said, her tone becoming slightly more aggressive. Your father's advisors were focused on conservative, traditional approaches that might not be optimal for our current situation. I declined Vivian's proposal again and told her that I was comfortable with Dad's estate planning decisions and did not want to make any changes without careful consideration and professional advice from Dad's own legal and financial team. Vivian seemed disappointed and frustrated by my response, but she did not push the issue further during that dinner. But over the following months, Vivian made several more attempts to convince me to modify Dad's estate planning, each time with slightly different proposals and arguments about why changes would be beneficial for both of us. She suggested that we sell Kane Development and split the proceeds, that we liquidate Dad's investment portfolio and distribute the cash, and that we dissolve the trust structures and transfer all assets to their ultimate beneficiaries immediately. I realized that she was systematically testing different approaches to see if she could find arguments or pressure tactics that would convince me to give her access to more of Dad's wealth. Each proposal was designed to maximize her immediate financial gain while minimizing my long-term financial security and inheritance protection. If you have ever wondered whether someone in your family might be trying to manipulate you into making financial decisions that benefit them at your expense, pay attention to the warning signs that I was seeing in Vivian's behavior. 18 months after Dad's death, Vivian made one final attempt to access more of his wealth through a legal challenge to his will and estate planning. She hired attorneys who specialized in estate litigation and filed court papers claiming that Dad had not been mentally competent when he created the trust structures that controlled my inheritance, and that his estate planning had been unduly influenced by advisors who had not properly considered her rights as his surviving spouse. The legal challenge was ultimately unsuccessful because Dad's estate planning had been carefully documented and properly executed, and because there was clear evidence that he had been mentally competent and had made his decisions independently. But the litigation process was expensive and emotionally draining, and it confirmed my suspicions about Vivian's true motivations and intentions. During the court proceedings, Margaret was able to introduce evidence about Vivian's previous marriages and her pattern of targeting wealthy older men, information that helped demonstrate that her legal challenge was motivated by financial opportunism rather than legitimate concerns about Dad's estate planning. Mrs. Patterson has a documented history of marrying wealthy men who die within a few years of marriage, and of pursuing legal challenges to maximize her inheritance from their estates, Margaret told the judge during one of the hearings. Her current challenge to Mr. Keynes will follows the same pattern of behavior that she exhibited following the deaths of her 3 previous husbands. The judge dismissed Vivian's legal challenge and awarded attorney fees to Dad's estate, effectively requiring her to pay the costs of her unsuccessful litigation attempt. The ruling also included language that would make it difficult for Vivian to file additional challenges to Dad's estate or to my inheritance. After the court ruling, Vivian moved out of Dad's house and relocated to California, where she apparently began the process of identifying her next wealthy target. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had been seen at social events and charity fundraisers in Los Angeles and San Francisco, locations where successful older men might be vulnerable to her predatory tactics. I never spoke to Vivian again after the conclusion of the estate litigation. I felt no obligation to maintain contact with someone who had viewed my father as nothing more than a source of money and who had attempted to steal the inheritance he had intended for me. 2 years after Dad's death, I used part of my secret inheritance to purchase a controlling stake in Kane Development, giving me active involvement in the company's strategic planning and operations while maintaining the professional management structure that Dad had established. I also began working part-time for Kane Development while continuing my position at Meridian Capital Management, gradually transitioning toward the career in real estate development that Dad had always hoped I would pursue. Your father would be proud to see you taking an interest in the company he built, James Morrison told me during one of our meetings about Kane Development's expansion plans. He always believed that you had the intelligence and judgment to be successful in this business, even if you chose to approach it differently than he did. I also began using my inheritance to support causes and organizations that had been important to Dad, including affordable housing projects, small business development programs, and educational initiatives that provided opportunities for young people from low-income families. These philanthropic activities felt like ways of honoring Dad's memory while using his wealth to create positive impacts on communities and individuals who needed support and opportunities. Last month, I learned through a private investigator that Vivian had married her fifth husband, a 72-year-old retired pharmaceutical executive in San Diego who had recently lost his wife to Alzheimer's disease. According to the investigator's report, Vivian had met her new husband at a grief support group and had convinced him to marry her after a 6-month courtship that included expensive trips and luxury experiences that he paid for. The investigator also reported that Vivian's new husband had recently updated his will to make her his primary beneficiary, and that he had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer that might significantly reduce his life expectancy. The pattern was continuing exactly as Margaret's research had predicted. I felt sad for Vivian's new victim, but I also felt grateful that Dad's wisdom and foresight had protected me from becoming another casualty of her predatory behavior. The secret inheritance that I had initially been uncertain about keeping confidential had turned out to be the most important gift Dad could have given me, not just because of the financial security it provided, but because it demonstrated his love and his determination to protect me from threats that I had not even recognized. Last week, I moved into a new house that I purchased with part of my inheritance, a beautiful craftsman-style home in the Madison Park neighborhood with views of Lake Washington and enough space to start a family when I meet the right person. The house represents my new life as someone who understands the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who view you as a source of financial opportunity. If you have ever wondered whether family members who seem too interested in money and inheritance might have hidden motivations, if you have ever felt uncomfortable about the way someone in your family talks about estate planning and financial assets, then you understand why my father's decision to keep secrets from his wife saved both his legacy and my future. Sometimes the people who claim to love us are actually predators who view us as sources of financial gain rather than as human beings deserving of genuine affection and respect. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we love is to protect them from family members who would exploit their trust and generosity for personal profit. The $20 million that my father left me in secret was not just money. It was protection from a woman who had made a career out of marrying and burying wealthy men, and it was proof that even when we are at our most vulnerable, we can still find ways to protect the people we love from those who would harm them. Before you go, if this story helped you think about the importance of protecting your assets and your family from people who might have predatory intentions, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this story with someone who might need to understand the warning signs of financial manipulation in family relationships. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family members are not always who they seem to be, and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is to keep secrets from people who would use that information to harm you or others. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand the importance of protecting yourself and your loved ones from financial predators, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, trust is earned through actions, not demanded through family relationships.